Hello, everybody. I'm about to give you guys way too much information. Way too much. At the end of my junior year of undergraduate, I did what's called an REU. It's a research experience for undergraduates through the National Science Foundation, where undergraduates get to go do graduate level research for the summer, guided by an advisor to, ask your doctor if you're healthy enough for graduate level activity. I got to do mine at the University of Buffalo, studying antibiotics and antibiotic resistance in dairy manure. It was fantastic. I got to go around to dairy farms in upstate New York and sample raw manure in these tiny little tubes, and we would take them back to the lab, and we learned how to extract all the bacterial DNA out of them, and then amplify the genes that lie beneath the surface to see what was there. It was my introduction to molecular biology, and I couldn't have been more excited. But what's so special about my time in Buffalo wasn't the discovery of my own intellectual curiosity or what I would eventually be studying in graduate school. It's that if we rewind the clock 4 months, I was almost an entirely different person in an entirely different place. 4 months prior to New York, I was sitting in an emergency room in California, lucky to be alive. It was a festival, okay? You can laugh at that, that's fine. But the thing was, I had just been diagnosed with an anxiety and depression disorder and put on antidepressants. What better place to mend severe anxiety than in a crowd of 50,000 strangers, right? It was like those picturesque old videos of Woodstock or your friend's Instagram, right, where everybody's coming together, one with pure love and passing around drugs and just having the time of their life. And then there was me, the idiot, who was having a sustained panic attack, feeling like an alien piloting a newly synthesized human body. So I did the only thing I could think to do at the time, and it was a brilliant idea. I decided to do all of the drugs. As long as it would be my first time, right? So, what could go wrong? I smoked a bit of weed, and it made it worse. I drank a bit of booze, and it didn't help, and cocaine, and I popped some Addy, popped some ecstasy, I railed some Molly. Nothing could make that feeling go away. There was a hole in my chest. There was something missing. At that point, it was more existential than it was biochemical. Word to the wise, don't mix your new antidepressants with amphetamines in high doses. It's not a very good idea. The physician told me I had induced what's called serotonin syndrome, and I could have died. I'm like, fuck. I guess I was cutting it kind of close. After reviewing the literature, and by literature I mean Wikipedia, the risk of dying of serotonin syndrome is less than 1%. But the physician had done his job, right? I remember checking out of the emergency room with my father, just saturated in humiliation. I remember walking up to the counter and looking at a nurse's face. My mother's a nurse, and it was just the same look, just pure worry and concern and disappointment. A side effect of serotonin syndrome is like this headache that never seems to go away. It's like this gnarly hangover that disregards Alka-Seltzer. I had trouble reading, I had trouble sleeping, I had trouble being in public for more than a few minutes because I had made my anxiety so bad. And the worst part was I was contemplating quitting engineering school. But see, that's why my time in Buffalo and my REU meant so much to me. It was my first real introduction to science. And it was in those 10 weeks that I was rediscovering my own mind again. It made me appreciate the brain that sits atop my shoulders and how much I really, really don't want to piss it away. I had too many things to do and learn in lab to be anxious or depressed. It was like when you let a dog out for the first time on a Saturday morning and watching him run around. I remember my advisor pulling up the genome of E. coli, the bacteria, on her screen, and she just scrolled through the 5 million nucleotides that constituted existence, just to show me what was possible. It's like, you mean to tell me an entire organism, every snippet of information that constitutes its existence, can be contained in just a 1 megabyte text file? Like, that's bananas. That's crazy. I was rediscovering my sense of wonder for the universe. And I had identified that thing that was missing. I had identified that vacancy behind my sternum. I think they call it a sense of purpose. It was its absence that was guiding me by the hand at that festival. Now, the experiments I was doing in Buffalo were probably pretty basic, right? Of course, I was learning. But that's not the point. The point is that it was no longer about myself. It was about the world of knowledge around me and how one day, if I really threw my whole weight into it, I could even contribute to this body of knowledge and help out the people that I cared about, help out my community, if not in some infinitesimal way. And the best part of that was my anxiety had all but evaporated. That was the best feeling since sliced bread to happen in my life so far. Call it the curse of millennial optimism. So take that newfound optimist and throw him into graduate school, and he gets his first real project to work on, and it's this amazing opportunity to go down to Puerto Rico to sample rural drinking water after Hurricane Maria. On one hand, being in a lab full of water quality engineers, we were equal parts really excited and really concerned about sampling after such a historic disaster. On one hand, we were going to be diagnosing these systems where fatal bacterial infections have been reported. And on the other hand, we were going to be diagnosing these systems where fatal bacterial infections have been reported. Like, that's a lot of weight and responsibility to be putting on a newly fledged engineer and optimist. On our first day of sampling, we took our water quality lab across the island. And as we got further away from the urban areas, it was like we were walking into a war zone. The streetlights had been out, and the roofs had been ripped off of buildings, and the palm trees had been flattened. As we got closer towards our sampling areas up in the mountains and the rural parts, if you took a look around, you could see white pickup trucks filled with big, burly dudes in Oakleys. They were there to repair the electrical grid. This whole part of the island had been on generator power the last 5 months. As we drove up to where we were going to be sampling up in the mountains, if you looked up to the ridgeline, you can see helicopters installing the telephone poles. Clearly, something traumatic had happened here. You could feel it. The systems we were going to be sampling were off of the city water. They were constructed by community members out of PVC lines. My job was to follow these PVC lines up into the jungle and investigate if any surface water had inundated them, to investigate if that's where the pathogens were coming from. On our first system, I was to be led through the jungle by this man named Silvario. Him and his brother had constructed the system 40 years ago and still maintained it. I remember as he led me with his machete through the jungle, he was concerned about his drinking water. He was concerned about the pathogens that were probably in his drinking water. He had never had a tenured professor and a team full of graduate students, to come and investigate his system. It was the first time that I felt that I actually my answers held weight, my voice, my opinion as an engineer and a graduate student. Like, my opinion held weight, enough weight between a life and a death, and all I wanted to do was be as honest as I could, as true as I could. On our way back down, after I sampled his water, a backpack full of water, he asked me a very practical question. When am I going to see the results of your study? When am I going to know if my community is at risk? I replied to him, 5 to 6 weeks, tops. 5 to 6 weeks. I didn't know what research was at that point. I didn't know how hard it was to do science well. It's been nearly 2 years since I took those samples, since we took those samples. And I wish I had the super awesome ending where we publish immediately and Silvario and his community have their answers and we win a Nobel Prize and I no longer needed to be on antidepressants. But that's not how it works sometimes. Sometimes you have to walk before you can run, and sometimes you have to learn what it actually means to be a graduate student before you can help save the world. Baby steps. But I realize how far I've come since that emergency room, how much work I've done to fill that hole in my chest with love and learning and friends and family, and healthy coping mechanisms, and science. But that's how I'll do it. That's how I'll repay Savario and his community and the entire island. I repay them with good science. I repay them with the correct answer. I repay them with the best work that I can do and knowing that that's okay. I've learned a few things since California and that emergency room and Buffalo and Puerto Rico, and I want to share them with you. So maybe you guys can take away from these stories as much as I have, as much as I've learned. Number one, we must own our mistakes because they make us who we are. There's no avoiding that, so we might as well just relive them on stage in front of a live audience. Number two, our brains and minds are beautiful and wonderful things, and we should do everything that we can to keep them healthy. I think that's a given. Number three, living an unselfish life in the service of your community is just a better way to go about it. Just listen to the stories my colleagues tell. Number four, that sense of wonder for your universe and the insatiable curiosity that it comes with it can take you a very long way. So if you have the bug of curiosity, keep it. It is a gift. And number five, and probably most importantly for me, a sense of purpose is the most potent antidepressant on the market. Go figure. Thank you.